Hey, everybody, it's Rick. Welcome back to another live stream. I'm with Corbin Trent today, Democratic strategist, smart guy, builder of organizations, and somebody I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to today because we may come from different political angles into this world, but I think we're both in that pro-democracy space right now where we're looking at this world that we're in and going, oh, shit, how do we fix this one? So, Corbin, thanks for coming on the show today, man. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Glad to be here, Rick.
I wanted to talk to you because the big story of LA and the sudden federal presence of active duty troops in the streets is kind of eaten up a lot of our political dialogue today. Look, I think the more important story out there is this militarization. The immigration stuff is like the through line, but that's the excuse, not the reason. The reason, I think, is he wants to normalize having federal troops in people's faces.
I mean, it seems clear, right? I mean, there was not really nobody in law enforcement asked for the help.
Right.
No, none of the mayors asked for the help. The governor didn't ask for the help.
Yeah.
There wasn't the violence that was happening did not seem like it was out of control in terms of the LAPD being able to handle it. They seemed to be quite capable. Not, they were obviously under duress and attack, but it didn't seem like an attack that they couldn't handle. Yeah. And what everybody says, what is it, a test case? Is it dry run? I think this man's full of dry runs. Hopefully he goes taco again and chickens out on this too. I think there's, but it's a dangerous precedent. And then now he's got this big military day parade coming up, or the military parade coming up on his birthday. And he's already
North Korea.
It's wild. And he's really ramping up this idea of don't come to DC and protest, which is obviously, sort of like come to DC and protest, right? Isn't that what he's asking people to do?
Right. You want to throw down, I do think that the military parade it's partly about his giant ego. I know he's wanted to do this now for 10 years almost, where he has been obsessed with having this damn parade. And isn't going to, the weather doesn't look like it's going to cooperate. Oh no, but here we are. But you and I both come out of the comms world, and I do think this week we need to take a moment and acknowledge that, love him or hate him, Gavin Newsom has actually played the game, the narrative game, better than a lot of Democrats could be expected to do in a circumstance like this. I think he's done pretty well this week. I'm not a super fan of Gavin Newsom, but I do think he went out there and actually has fought back kind of on the terms that Trump didn't expect.
I mean, I think that's sort of clear in the fact that he's been able to break through. I mean, like you said, that this is sort of a dominating news cycle. Obviously, he's in a good position to break through with this news cycle, but he's done it in a way that's, it made him look a little stronger. I would like to have seen him out there on the ground more, but he's playing the media game well. He's playing the social game well. I think he's got good instincts, or a good team and good instincts on what to put through. He's been able to turn it into something that's extremely serious, but at the same time minimizing and sort of making Donald Trump look weak, which is a tough needle to thread. I think to take on the seriousness of this situation, but then also not make Donald Trump look like a very successful strongman. That's a very tough needle to thread, and I think he's doing that well.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, I also think, going back to the excuse for for this deployment, which is the immigration raids all over the country, and California is particularly hard hit, obviously. Look, Republicans really want to frame this as the central issue of 2026, I think. What would you be counseling Democrats right now in how you respond on the immigration question and the broader questions of how Trump is using government power? Because a lot of Americans are getting caught up in this net as well.
Yeah. It depends on who I was working for, really.
Sure.
Because
that's the correct answer, by the way, folks.
If I were talking about what I think, we should be doing, I think we should have gone back further, back to Bill Clinton, and not worked with the vilification of immigrants and people that are coming here for a better life, and people that are coming here to try to achieve things, and then also help to build things. I'm in Lenoir City, Tennessee, which is a small little town in Northeast Tennessee. And we've got about a 14% Spanish speaking population, immigrant population. And, they're vital to the community. Not only are they good neighbors that help you out when your trees fall down, which has happened to me a few times, but they're also the people that are running a lot of the businesses here that are, that make things go and make things happen. And so I think if we had a do-over, we shouldn't have fallen into the trap of letting this vilification happen in the first place. But the problem is that the cat's out of the bag, and it's going to be hard to bring that in for 2026. Unless you get a really strong, powerful leader that can talk about the value of people and community. And the funny thing is, like you talk about, I think this idea resonated with people of removing this mythical, imaginary person, right? This was this murderous rapist,
the MS-13,
right?
Whatever,
which is like there is, I guarantee, as many neo-Nazi rapists as there are MS-13 rapists, right? And just the fact that they're undocumented, I don't think makes them any more dangerous. It actually makes it easier to remove them if we can find them, right? So in my mind, I think that the Democratic Party lost its footing, but in so many ways, right? The Democratic Party has lost its footing trying to figure out how to calculate, triangulate, be just enough like the Republican Party that's in power, just enough like the people that are winning elections, that they've lost their own brand. I think that's the only way that Joe Biden won in 20 was that he was sort of distanced from the National Democratic brand. He had a stronger brand individually that was able to overcome the So I would advise them to start building something different and something new, or get used to, following the leader and see what Josh Hawley's going to do. And then,
I think there's a big space that George W. Bush got 37% of the Hispanic vote because, in part, he went out and said, these are hardworking people. We should give them a path to citizenship. We should give them a path where they can stay here legally and work legally. You go back in time, and there was a period back there's a great piece of video, I don't know if you've seen it, from 1980. And it's Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, my old boss, standing on a stage, and they're basically fighting who can be better for immigrants. But they're like having this conversation, like, no, we should do this, and we should help, integrate them into schools and this, because they both acknowledge it's like and Reagan, famously did a basically pathway to citizenship thing where he legalized an awful lot of people that were here. And Republicans have now said, you're the enemy. If your last name is the wrong last name and it sounds like it's from Latin America or South America, you're out. And I don't know that Democrats have quite figured out yet that there's an appeal to the families of those people that are already here that they need to be making. That will
what do you
overcome.
Think happens? So we've seen the shift among Latinos towards Trump, right?
Yeah.
And he's getting very close to majority of the Latino vote, right? We've seen shift among African Americans. We've seen a shift, we've all seen the polling. So do you think it's possible for the leadership of the party, of the Republican Party, for the MAGA movement to, once they see that this is actually their people, and politically speaking, electorally speaking, do you think they can pivot in any way, shape, or form and keep their white base?
I don't think they can. I think that Fox in particular and the MAGA sort of media enterprise broadly have demonized those folks so much that they painted them with such a broad brush. It's like they're all here illegally, they're all criminals, and I think that's a tough needle to thread. But I think the way that Democrats can win back some of those Hispanic voters, Trump didn't talk to them as Hispanic voters, he talked to them as working class voters.
Yeah.
And if Democrats can get off of the 30,000 foot academia, let me talk about my 750-page economic plan, and get down to talking about, let me show you how we're going to make your life better, which Democrats should have a natural advantage on in this universe.
I don't think they do anymore.
They don't.
They don't.
They should, but they don't.
And like Steve Bannon, this who I was terrified of back in 2020.
Mhm.
So Steve Bannon's, running some things and policies, running, he's got some really sort of almost Stephen Miller-esque views too.
Sure.
But one of the things he understood is that you need to put money in people's pockets. You need to put people to work.
Yep.
And so one of the phrases I told people, I got a cousin who's an electrician out here. And right now he's working for 22 an hour. And I said, if he gets a $32 an hour scale job down at ORNL or Y12 or
Yep.
one of these plants in Oak Ridge,
Yep.
off of something that Steve Bannon and Trump are doing, we're screwed. We're done. Right. Because once they start doing that kind of work, once they start building more roads, once they start actually industrializing the nation in real ways, we're screwed. And you would think, you say Democrats ought to have their DNA, but they're just so, I believe the Democratic Party that exists now is the Democratic Party that sort of was left after being decimated by Ronald Reagan and then trying to recover and figure out who they were. And they never quite figured out who they were except the opposition. So even when they've been in power, I don't think they figured out how to,
right.
I was looking at one thing today and I'll stop here, but
No.
in Tennessee, healthcare used to be about 50% owned by either the state, municipalities, counties, et cetera, right? It was state owned in one way or another. About 50% of the healthcare infrastructure, not the insurance, the whole infrastructure. And this is until like the 60s. And then, of course, the privatization wave came, and then now it's about 10%, and it's mostly mental health facilities. But that used to be a very Democratic idea. That's sort of like the TVA, FDR Democratic idea. And that's just gone from the DNA of how the government can work for working class people.
Yeah, I think that feeling that part of this in the Trump era is that they associate Trump with prosperity. It's a shortcut. It's phony. It's all like the whole like apprentice image, but a lot of folks, working class voters, associated him with prosperity.
Yeah,
and while COVID was a very hard hit, they remembered those $500 checks with his name on them. And I think that had a knock-on
You're
effect.
right, though. It was just an identity. Because, I'm a general contractor. That's what I do for.
Yep.
And a lot of my crews are Latinos, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
That goes without saying. And we would have these conversations during the last election. We're sitting at lunch. I'm listening to these guys talk, and they're all Trump fans, every single one of them. And I'm starting to ask them, why? And like the normal response I got was this. They would just do the little money fingers. And there was this idea that because he had made money, he would know how to help them make money. And that would somehow, transition to them.
I overcoming that image has been something. Back in 2015, I was in some early focus groups trying to beat him. And these people were just like, nope, he's the richest man in New York. Got more money than anybody. He built all the New York skyline. Every building is Trump's. He owns everything. Right. He's so rich. He's this, he's that. They would never listen to, he's a tax cheat, he's an idiot, he's a criminal. They didn't care about any of it. He owns 4 buildings in New York. That's it. Nothing would penetrate that like illusion from The Apprentice, which was it was so weird because you're like, are you sure about that? They were always like, oh, I'm positive about that. I know definitely that's the case. So, but I do think, and you're right, Joe Biden had a working class connection that certainly Barack Obama did not have that vibe. Hillary Clinton certainly did not have that vibe, and neither did Harris for that matter. Yeah. So I do think that Biden was like the one person who could pick the lock in 2020. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for Democrats in 2028 is finding somebody who can unite the party and who can bring back some of those voters, who can talk to them in their language, who can speak English to Americans and not, I can tell you, I've been in a million of these focus groups where these working class Dems go, don't come to me with a 500-page plan. I'm not going to read it. It's also bullshit. I think one of the biggest failings of the Democratic Party that if you dig into these focus groups and these working class communities in the Northeast and the North Central US, when they said, oh, we're going to retrain you after your auto job disappears, that promise of retraining never meshed in their heads. They never believed in it.
Right. And it turned out not to be true.
Yeah.
I mean,
it turned out not to be true.
There's lots of evidence that that's not true. And that's one of the things that scares me about where we're at now is that you see AI coming in some pretty aggressive ways, and that's going to go
Sure.
after a huge part of your GDP base. You know, there's a lot of GDP that'll be knocked out by AI over the next 5-6 years.
Those
And
jobs that drift, those jobs that drift from manufacturing to services, man, that is like a sweet big fat target for those AI companies that are they're gonna you know, it's actually ironically going to be in a weird way a golden age for people who work with their hands. You know, contractors and electricians and plumbers. That's not going to be replaced by AI any minute soon.
No, I'm like, my wife she's sort of in mid-level tech at a credit union, right? She does pretty well at it. But I keep telling her this job's one of the first to go. You know, she's working basically as a liaison between the various folks that make the systems that run the bank and the users and so on and so forth. And I'm there. And the problem is that if because we did not figure out how to retool for the manufacturing workers. I mean, and the problem was manufacturing jobs, the stats I've seen created about 7.4 residual jobs, or, sort of
collateral. Right.
And whereas your sort of retail or fire jobs even create about 2.3 per job. Yeah. So you had this sort of imbalance in what the value was. But now, just like masks became sort of hyper politicized during COVID, we've almost done the same thing with manufacturing or an industrial base or vertical supply chains. Right. Like I'm on Twitter arguing, and people think I'm a MAGA guy. It's and they don't even hear my accent. It's just because I want to bring manufacturing back, and I think that we need to have it.
I mean, there are a lot of things as a country, as a responsible country, you should have that you can manufacture in this day and age.
Yeah,
you need to be able to make your own. You fabricate your own silicon chips for technology in the military and for industry. You need to be able to make your own industrial materials to a great degree. Is it great that there's a global supply chain? Absolutely, love it. But there are core functionalities you should have as a country, and I don't think what I think that this whole tariff fight was a kind of a cruel illusion for American workers, because Trump's going to go yes, no, yes, no, yes, no on these tariffs. And who's going to build a plant based on Trump's intentions? Who's going to say, okay, we're going to go into Ohio and build a $5 billion chip fabrication plant, but Trump could change his mind tomorrow and we'd be fucked.
Right. I mean, we went from having 23 aluminum smelters to, I think there's now 3 in operation. Right. Alcoa's one of the, big aluminum processor here, and they've got a big plant in the area. I mean, and they're just not going to dump. And they said, we're not doing it, or Apple. Apple's putting, the stat I read the other day was they're putting about $50 billion a year now for many, many years into Chinese training, Chinese tooling, and they've invested this money. Then to leave that, to pull that out, because they're not going to get to bring the machines. They're not going to let them take the machines out of there, right? They can't take the people out of there. So then to leave that and come here on a whim, and that's the thing. Like, you've got these tariffs, which are protective. They protect industry. They don't build industry,
right?
First of all. And you don't have that much industry to protect in the first place, So what do we're protecting auto industry maybe, but the other way.
But the U.S. steel industry has shrunken so far down that you've got a if it was modernized, if it was built to the new technical specifications of the era we live in, it's not going to employ a ton of workers like it used to. But it is going to be, I would be economically valuable. We're not going to go back to, guys waiting in line for the next shift. It's now been much more automated than that, which I think is also one of the things that is kind of a betrayal of working Americans. If you shouldn't tell them, hey, you're going to go back and dig coal, because we're not going to have 500,000 coal miners anymore. We've got like 60,000 of them left in the country. It's just it's done by robots, and that's not going to change. I don't think either party is ready for how much AI and robotics is going to change the economy.
No, there's no question. And and I don't think any party is looking at the moment very well either. I think there's bits and pieces that tell me that Josh Hawley may be, or that there's a handful of individuals that sort of see the opportunities that are coming up in 26 and 28. But, I look back at the George Floyd protests, and I look back at January 6th. I look at what's happening in LA right now. I look back, the big movement they had when Donald Trump first got elected with the marches, the Women's March, and various other things. And I see a common thread, and the common thread is discontent, fear, worry, and I don't think either party grasps, to the extent that Donald Trump did, at all, the value of this moment in reshaping this country and where we head next. I mean, I was doing some research today about, does the Constitution really prevent authoritarianism? And not really. It doesn't have that many guardrails to prevent authoritarianism. It's it doesn't guarantee democracy. A lot of the voting rights are just decided by states, so there's not that many things other than the will of the people in this country and our desire to stop things like authoritarianism that are going to do it. We're waiting on these saviors to come stop this stuff, but the problem is that's us, right?
I mean, that was the founders thought that we would always be the saviors,
right?
The founders thought that we would pick up the responsibility of maintaining what they had won, through the Revolutionary War, that we would value that and we would always protect it. And I think the political current in this country about authoritarianism is a very dangerous one, because you don't get to unratchet. Once that ratchet turns, it only turns one direction, short of everything really going very, very bad. And I think that I think you're right. I think, Corbin, that you're exactly right. Both parties are missing this moment. There is a broken nature to our government. There's a distrust of everything by many voters on both sides of the political aisle. And
don't you reckon that's earned a little bit, that distrust?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I've written and talked about this a lot. I mean, there's been a endless chain of promises by both parties. Follow our method and and your life will be great.
Right.
Follow our path and your life will turn great. And in both cases, they get captured by their own parties get captured by their own internal dynamics, and they end up either breaking those promises or worse, delivering something awful and saying, that's what we promised you. And corruption is an equal opportunity affliction in DC these days. I mean, both sides of the aisle are trading stocks, and they're
right.
And they're. I think that is, I mean, and your friend AOC has been out in front on this. This idea of trading stocks, if you're a member of Congress, is outrageous. It's outrageous.
Insane.
It is so
the idea that you can separate your desire, your human primal desire for accumulating wealth and power, from knowing that NVIDIA is going to go up tomorrow.
Right.
I mean,
or going to a White House meeting and hearing, hey, I'm going to impose tariffs tomorrow, and people go and run and play, the dump things that they know are going to go down in the market. It's, I don't. And look, I get why there's been stubbornness by some Democrats on it, because it's a great insider trading gig, but
lucrative industry.
But it's like if you just stopped it, it would send a signal, I think, to Americans, 95% of whom do not have a portfolio with 1,000 shares of NVIDIA in it,
right,
or Apple or whatever. I just think that corruption stuff I still believe it's the killer app in politics in a lot of ways.
But I think that's why they didn't go after Trump harder on that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, legally speaking, right? When they had the DOJ, because they know that once you open that can of worms, you talk about ratcheting something. You start going after actual corruption, insider trading, shit like that. And there's a lot of Democrats gonna fall down on that one.
It took Democrats time to come out against Bob Menendez in New York.
Right.
A few of them were still at the very end, it's regrettable. No, it's not regrettable. It's fucking criminal.
Nobody cares about a sack of gold bars. It's
right. Who doesn't have a sack of gold bars buried in their backyard by the pool?
Right.
I mean, certainly I do.
Right. We all do. Yeah. And that's why I don't want to talk I don't want to be bad about that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, who wants to spoil that party?
And I think that's the, sort of the commonality between the leaderships of the parties and sort of even the rank and file of the parties, right? Is that they're connected by this, grift, They're connected by a desire to not do anything outrageous when it comes to our economic structure. Like there's this belief that we live in a very fluid capitalist system, right? And it's a bunch of horseshit. Like the idea,
Complete
the
crap.
fear of communism was that the state would control the means of production. I
Right.
don't
And what do
want
you see
Elon
right
Musk
now? Donald
controlling
Trump
it,
telling people what they can make.
right?
And look,
Or
I
even
come
if
at
it
this
was
from
just
the
Elon
right.
Musk,
I come at
you
this from
know?
the right as a free market guy who realized about 10 years ago that it was all a lie, as my friend Stuart Stevens says, and that Washington has been captured by lobbyists. They control the regulatory processes to advantage their companies. And who are the people getting fucked? It's consumers
Every day,
every day.
every day.
And I honestly think, Corbin, there is like a weird left-right alliance on that. And you mentioned Josh Hawley, who I have a lot of critiques of Josh on things,
Yeah.
but he's actually been speaking out about the corruption that occurs by regulatory capture and how, you know, it's calling the bullshit on the lie that, oh, this is a free market party that doesn't want to intervene or pick winners and losers or anything like that. This is Republicans have now very much become like statist and directing the economic outcomes. It sees the means of production, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I just
And they're not doing it for the benefit of people, generally speaking. So that's the other problem. Like, so let me run this one by you. This would definitely test our ideological standards here. And so to have this thought process, you'll have to accept my data as
okay.
fact. So right now, at least according to the national, I believe it's a CMS report, the healthcare industry that we're currently in is projected to cost $77 trillion from this year in the next 10 years. 10 years, 77 trillion bucks. And it's got declining outcomes. It's got more and more consolidation, more and more monopolization. What I think personally, and having done research and just sort of thinking this through, is that the only way to reset that capitalist system of healthcare is through robust competition. And I think the only thing that's powerful enough to actually compete with these massive giants is the government. And I think if you had a functional government, like right now, thinking about the government controlling anything is scary, right?
Right.
But if you had a functional democracy and a functional government that could reopen clinics in Knoxville, that could reopen clinics in rural Eastern Kentucky, that could reopen and start training doctors in mass, and then build up our productive, and then start bringing down the costs of other hospitals because they would have to compete with public hospitals, right? So even back in the 50s and such that I was telling you earlier, it wasn't like, we owned all of the hospital beds in Tennessee, the state. We just owned some of them. We owned enough to keep the system, the capitalist system in a little bit of check. Right now, what are you going to do? You're going to boycott them? I mean, you got cancer, you're going to boycott the chemo people? No.
I think you're exactly. I think you're on a very good trail there, because right now, because of regulatory capture in the states and in the federal system, these companies have no accountability. These mergers between giant healthcare companies are approved all the time. They've got a system that allows a stacked profit model at each point that has no market forces influencing it in most places. It's a duopoly for health insurance in most communities in this country at best.
At best,
and in the private market. And I've been thinking about this a lot in the last couple of years. If you start find places where the markets are totally broken, and there are plenty of them.
Deserts,
rural America is fucked
Yeah.
on healthcare markets, and they pay the highest prices for the lowest amount of service. You start offering something where the government even provides a guarantee or provides the financial backstop for new competitors, you will immediately see what happens, just like with cable. Every market where there's a cable duopoly or monopoly, when you ended up with a third party coming in to provide cable TV service or cable internet, prices dropped by about 60% overnight. When you can run a duopoly or a monopoly, prices are going to naturally increase. I think there are ways to do it that bring free market competition into the mix, where you also end up with, with a recognition that the government has to provide some juice to help support,
to keep it going. You've got to lubricate the gears of capitalism, or they don't work. They just get rusted and fail. Like
it's an incredibly broken system right now.
AT&T still exists in Chattanooga. So does Verizon.
Sure.
But so does also the China or the Chattanooga gigabit fiber network.
Yeah.
They coexist now. And guess what? The internet's way better down there, and it's cheaper.
Listen, it's let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Exactly.
So anyway, hey Corbin, I want to thank you so much for coming on today, man. Really an interesting conversation, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, look forward to it, Rick. Pleasure meeting you again.
Thanks, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.